Been a while since I've done a full review on a TV series, hasn't it? In fact, I don't think I've really done a full video on a TV show since the beginning of my channel when I recapped my thoughts on the first season of Titans every week. And I'd honestly like to forget about some of those videos from before 2020 if you don't mind, because I was not very good at making videos. I mean, I'm still not, but whatever. So yeah, talking about TV. The reason I don't do it much is because a lot of the time I don't really know how to approach talking about a TV series, or I don't think I have enough to say about it. But then I saw this little show that was appearing on Netflix with new episodes every Thursday. One I initially didn't pay much mind to, but then started watching out of curiosity after seeing a meme or two about on TikTok. And it is now my favorite anime. Yeah, suck it, My Hero Academia or Demon Slayer. The thing is, if we're being honest, I realize shows like Demon Slayer probably have more to offer by way of themes, animation, and that sort of thing than Komi Can't Communicate. But at the end of the day, this show is my favorite of all the anime I've seen, and I have rewatched some of the episodes several times despite the fact that I started watching it in November. There's just an element of comfort I can feel watching it, from the beautiful animation, to the hilarious and relatable characters, to the immense heart that it has. It's also just obscenely cute, and sometimes that's all a show really has to be for me to fall in love with it. So let's break it down. Why I love Komi Can't Communicate. So what's this show actually about? This is Hitohito Tadano. He's an idiot, but he's at least moderately aware of that. He has started attending Itan Private High School, a high school that we're soon to learn is full of absolute weirdos. Within 30 seconds, he and the entire school decide to be down atrociously for Shoko Komi, an aloof first year at the school who they all find impossibly pretty. However, the difference between Tadano and the majority of these weirdos is that he has a modicum of respect for Komi, and he quickly realizes she isn't aloof because she thinks she's all that. She is in fact terrified of talking to people. Tadano reaches out to Komi, and the two become friends, with Tadano vowing to try and help Komi make more friends. Yeah, it's not an overly complicated premise, but in my mind this is one of the show's strengths. It isn't overly burdened by trying to maintain a complicated premise, and is instead able to delve deep into the experiences of the characters and how they feel about them with ease. Well, now is as good a time as any to talk about this, so let's get it started. To begin with, I don't mind the Netflix subtitles. Now hold on, let me explain myself. Before I say anything else, I will obviously agree with the main thing people do not like about the Netflix subtitles, that it leaves a lot of the text on screen untranslated, making for a viewing experience that feels very incomplete. That is something about the Netflix subs that does annoy me quite a bit, but sometimes it's not as bad as all that. There are several instances across the show where a text box and the narrator's voice are saying pretty much exactly the same thing, so it strikes me that just having the one caption for those instances is a bit more efficient, because the screen might become a little cluttered if you have two sets of subtitles saying exactly the same thing. So in these instances, the Netflix translation works nicely, although in most other cases where there's a lot more text going on and it's not translated at all, it's a lot more irritating. I do have to wonder if the English-speaking DVD and Blu-ray releases will go through and redraw some of these text boxes into English like they have with things like My Hero Academia. That would be neat, but that's not what they're doing on Netflix, and it's really annoying. However, the main thing I preferred about the Netflix subtitles is their translation, or rather the consistency of it. When you're seeing fan subs from several sources all over the place, it can be a little distracting not having a consistent subtitle experience, especially if some of those subs aren't particularly accurate. I have nothing but respect for these fan subbers, by the way, but one of the more popular ones I've seen floating around on YouTube has a few situational and grammatical errors. So having subtitles in one style and translation approach is helpful to me, whose brain gets easily irritated by inconsistencies in anything. Yes, I know this is a me problem, but this is where we are at the moment. Furthermore, several changes were made on Netflix to the translation of the opening of episode 6, where Komi tells several dad jokes. Most of them are puns, which just don't translate into English. Neko wa Nekoronda might be an amusing pun in Japanese, but the literal translation of the cat lay down contains no such humor in English. For this reason, in the subs for Netflix, they replace these jokes with English puns and dad jokes of equal standing, like "It's raining cats and dogs, I just stepped in a poodle." Honestly, in terms of a viewing experience and understanding what is happening, this works far better for me. While the literal translations in the fan subs are neat and do provide an insight into these puns, having these puns in English in the Netflix subs gives a better context, I think. Controversially, it seems, the Netflix subs also translate words like chunibyo. Some argue that words like that should be left alone, and I can understand And why? Because there doesn't seem to be a direct translation to English for Chunibyo. However, in the Netflix subs, it is translated situationally. The narrator states that Nakanaka has a rich fantasy life, and Najimi repeatedly calls her, and by extension Tadano from junior high, cringy. I'll be honest, I like this translation. For people who don't know what the hell a Chunibyo is, read me before I went to the Komi subreddit, it conveys the message perfectly. Nakanaka lives in her own little world and is seen as a bit childish by the people around her. It's by no means a perfect translation, but for anime casuals like myself, it works a lot better than having to break out the dictionary when I come across something I don't understand. I'm illiterate, I'm sorry. However, I came across a fan sub of such incredible quality that I think I'm now going to switch from that from here on in. The work that the group NovaWorks has put into their fan subs for Komi is nothing short of mind-blowing, and it fits the tone of the anime perfectly both in translation and in style. They do some localizing work like the Netflix subs do, but I find from my scans of it for this video that it actually makes it a little more accessible to anime casuals such as myself. And it also does make the dialogue sound a little bit more like listening to teenagers rather than some of the subs that I've seen on the internet that can approach being a little robotic. I can't even imagine how long it takes to typeset all the on-screen text translations and make it look natural. Now, they are pretty slow at getting episodes out. At the time of the script being written, they haven't even gotten episode 4 out, but for the absolute quality of their work, the wait seems more than worth it. However, as of the 7th of February, there's been another option onto how to watch this show legally, and that is the dub. I'm usually a dub guy myself, but this might be the first time I've preferred the original Japanese voice actors over an English dub, which isn't to say that the English dub is bad. Actually, for my money, it's pretty decent. It's pretty clear to me that the voice actors are having a lot of fun with the show, and it makes for a really nice energy in their performances. I'm particularly fond of Kyle McCarley as Tadano. I would have cast Zach Aguilar myself, but McCarley captures the same energy I was imagining for a dubbed Tadano, so it works really well for me. I'm also a massive fan of Skylar Davenport's take on Najimi. Going into this dub, Najimi was going to be my make or break for this dub, and I imagine I'm not alone in that, but Davenport is a lot of fun in the role, capturing Najimi's shit-stirring nature super well. Also like that they cast a non-binary actor for Najimi. It's the little things that add up. Amber Connors also largely does pretty well as Komi, I reckon. Now yes, most of her lines are various vocalizations of surprise and other such emotions with very few lines, but all the same she does it very well. In fact, I think we as fans get so wrapped up in the meme of being paid to go that follows Komi and Nezuko that I think we fail to realize that it's probably no easier to try and act with no lines, just trying to capture a feeling with a There's also a lot of stuttering involved with Komi, which can be hard to fake, and that's probably Connor's shortcoming. Now, through the season you can hear her getting more comfortable in the role, and her stuttering does become more natural, but in the first episode it's pretty uneven. Also, once you've heard Komi stuttering on rhythm to the soundtrack in the original, it's hard to go to something else. And that might be the biggest thing about this dub. As I said, it is solid and I do quite like it, but the original Japanese voice acting really is just that much better in this case, particularly with Aoi Koga as Komi. There are several little things across the series that she does that are just irreplaceable, like this little scream of shock when she sees Najimi's got something on their face, some of her quiet awestruck woes, and so on. Now, to be fair, I could just be a victim of what I started watching the show with. I feel like that's mostly the case with anime for me because I usually start watching something in dub, but for me, I think I will generally take the sub over the dub on this one, but I am pretty chuffed to have the dub regardless. I'd like to have a show on while I do things like write these videos, so having an option to watch the show idly with an English voice cast is pretty great. But if I want to watch this and invest in it, it's gonna be subs all the way. The art style of the show is just gorgeous. Every frame is filled with life, colors popping off the screen and carrying a softness around it that makes it very easy to just get sucked into the show. In fact, it was this beautiful art that first hooked me onto the show when I put the first episode on out of curiosity, pulling me into this series as a whole. I'm not really an art expert, so I'm hard up on ways to describe what I'm thinking, but one thing I can say that I love about this show's art style at length is the character design at play, particularly with Komi. Komi's the most distinctive in the show on account of the fact that she has two separate character designs: the cool, aloof, largely blank Komi, and the unrelentingly adorable, bug-eyed Komi. The thing that makes these designs so fascinating is the way they're applied to the series. The first design of Komi is largely used for moments where we're seeing how other people see Komi, especially in the first episode. On the flip side, the bug-eyed Komi is a better representation of how she feels a lot of the time. We also see that expression a lot more when she's at home and interacting with her family, as it is there that she feels most like herself. The other thing that blows me away is how expressive both of these forms are. On one hand, the outside Komi's design's facial expressions are mostly very subtle, with most of her facial expressions being communicated on her very small mouth like her very faint smiles. You may not even notice them the first time. But it really works. We're in Tadano's position, reading expressions and feelings from a face that is largely frozen out of anxiety. Then of course there's the faces on the bug-eyed Komi, which are a lot more exaggerated. From starry-eyed wonder, to anticipation, to a default wide-eyed anxiety. It's a fantastic design to illustrate Komi, both as a person trying to express herself and as an almost obscenely cute main character. And then there's the stylistic choice of her cat ears. This stylistic little quirk is not just very cute, but it also makes a great indicator for Komi's mood, as they only really pop up when she's really excited about something. They also tie in with a more thematic thread throughout the show that I will come back to in a moment. Also, I've seen a lot of you saying that she literally has cat ears in the show, and I'm gonna be honest, I don't get it. Like, yes, she's acknowledged them once or twice, but these moments usually play off as fourth wall humor more than anything else. This show already plays pretty fast and loose with the fourth wall where it thinks it can get a laugh, like with Yadano, and characters in anime acknowledging a style change is not unheard of. Tanjiro does it in Mugen Train. Hell, in the My Hero Academia manga, there are several jokes about All Might being drawn different than everyone else. Okay, that's a sidetrack. Point is, I don't actually think the cat ears are real. They're just there for style points. Let's redirect. Beyond the art style and character design, yes, that's the segue I'm rolling with, the animation and direction of this show is also beautiful. I'm not as well versed on words to describe good animation. Like, I know it when I see it. So all I can really do is point to specific moments where the animation does something I love, like this shot of Komi turning to Tadano in the first episode, or this transition between the aloof Komi and the bug-eyed Komi. There are also a lot of shots when they're using the chalkboard in the first episode where you can see the little crumbs of chalk coming off the chalk they're using to write on the board. It's really great attention to detail in the animation. But what I can talk about with some competence is the direction of the series, because there's some infinitely clever stuff going on there. My favorite example is this one trick that the show is very fond of, and that's this jump cut technique they apply to certain situations. To take an example, this scene from the first episode where Komi has to say her name to the class. She slides out of her seat, and then in a series of jump cuts makes her way slowly to the board, and then suddenly rushes at it to write her name. I'll admit I was thrown off the first time I saw this, but it is a super effective way of telling us that Komi is taking her time, obviously scared, without dragging the episode out with lots of static shots. It also does wonders for the pacing, as her approach to the board is just perfectly timed with these jump cuts. Another stylistic thing I really love about this show is the recurring use of cat imagery. I did just touch on this briefly with Komi's cat ears, but it extends far beyond that. Cats are a super important piece of this show's visual identity, from their appearances in the title sequence to the plushies that Komi surrounds herself with. This could just be seen as a bit of characterization that Komi is a cat person, me too, but I think it goes beyond that. I think they are used to reinforce Komi's character. Cats are generally known as shy creatures, but are also infinitely curious, and I feel like if we were to distill Komi's character down into two words, it would be shy and curious. The fact that she seems to share something of a kinship with cats seems to underline that point. I also think the fact that they are black cats is also a deliberate choice. Black cats are often seen as mysterious or spooky, or if you buy into the sort of superstitious stuff, as being bad luck. In reality, that cannot be further from the truth. They're just like any other cat, and they have so much love to give to people. I should know. I spent the first half of my life with two black cats. Their names were Morticia and Noir, by the way. In the same way, Komi is misunderstood. Everyone thinks she's this goddess, but in actual fact, she's a nervous high schooler who just wants a friend. It is a fantastic piece of imagery, and it adds so much to the art of the show and its thematic threads. Well, fellas, I have a new favorite anime opening. While I am absolutely psyched about the imminent arrival of the second series of this show, the one thing I am bummed about is the fact that we are most likely going to lose the absolute work of art that are these opening titles. In all honesty, I feel like there's a whole video's worth of analysis that could go into this OP, but I feel like this video is going to get pretty long as it is, so I'll try to keep it to the most important things I want to talk about. Overall, this title sequence in a way is a stylistic summary of the show. This isn't unique to the show, of course. A lot of anime OPs do this, but I am in love with the way that this particular sequence approaches the idea. For example, Komi's growing roster of friends across the show is quickly and efficiently shown in a montage taken from the point of view of Tadano's phone as he takes a group photo. I think my favorite thing about this is not just that it sets up some of the faces that we'll grow accustomed to across the series, Onamina and Otori are missing, which I find a curious choice, but that it also provides some quick characterization for them. Tadano trips on a desk and eats shit, showing that he's going to trip over himself on this show metaphorically sometimes, and the reaction of the others around him also helps to provide character. Agri and Nakanaka appear concerned, Najimi seems amused if you scan through it frame by frame, and Yamai is wearing a look on her face that approaches disgust. The art and animation is also super slick in this sequence. My favorite part, I feel, best exemplifies both of these. As the chorus begins, Komi bursts out of the classroom, running to join her friends in a pool on the roof of the school, I guess. No, I'm not going to judge the architecture of the school, it is completely beside the point. The first thing I love is the way that Komi's jump in the pool is drawn. As she jumps, she seems to fall through the clouds for quite some time, but then makes a small splash in the not yet filled pool. This is not an original observation by me, by the way, but someone in a comment section somewhere pointed out that this is a nice metaphor for Komi's experience with stepping into a social situation. It might not seem like much more than a tiny step or splash to most people, but for her, it's a massive leap. The other thing I love in this bit is the animation of Komi running out of the classroom. She runs out just a little too fast, then braces herself against the wall to change direction without losing too much speed. It's just such a perfectly natural human movement, but one that wouldn't occur to everyone to animate. I know I wouldn't have thought of it. It's things like this that show me just how much time and effort was put into the animation for this anime. Also on the animation front, the characters are lip syncing to the song that's playing over the titles. I don't see this often in anime openings, and I absolutely love this. Hey, speaking of the song, Cider Girl's OP for the show is an absolute bop. On the first watch of my show, I didn't have an earthly clue what the song meant on account of my not being able to speak a word of Japanese and Netflix electing not to show the lyrics for it in the subtitles. Netflix taking the L again. Get on Crunchyroll or Funimation's level, my god. So when I first watched it, I had to judge the song on the vibe of the music only. And its vibe for Komi is absolutely perfect. It's bright and fun, but it's also relaxing at the same time somehow. It also just feels really optimistic, and coupled with the visuals of the titles, it's the perfect introduction into what this show is as a whole, except for episode 4, but there is no episode 4. However, once I did look up the lyrics and found a translation for them, the song became even more fitting for the show. You see, the lyrics are told from the point of view of a socially awkward person trying to ask a girl out so they can live the small moments in life together. And if that isn't a perfect encapsulation of the friendship that Tadano and Komi share, I don't know what is. I mean, there's even a reference to cats in the lyrics. Man, I love this song. However, that's not the only piece of music from this show that's worth noting. The soundtrack of the show itself is also, in the words of Dale Cooper, damn good. Now, as of yet, Yukari Hashimoto hasn't released a soundtrack album for her work on this show yet, which is a bit of a bugger, as it does hinder my ability to listen to it in isolation and talk about it that way. However, there are a couple of pieces that stick in my mind. There's this lovely piano piece that plays over the intro of episode 2 that just has this soft, calming feeling to it as the narrator explains social anxiety that weirdly reminds me of those piano things that Aphex Twin does. I know there's no relation, but it just reminds me of that for some reason. At the end of the season, a similar piano piece plays over Komi writing down a list of her friends, one that has so far made me misty-eyed every time I've watched the show. But the main track that leaps to my mind, and I imagine everyone else's, is the score behind the chalkboard scene. It begins with this really delicate piano piece that more than anything sounds very lonely, a fairly obvious stand-in for how Komi feels. This on its own would threaten to move anyone to tears, but then a string section starts to play under the piano, playing a more optimistic sounding piece. At this point, the piano begins to become more uplifting too, and the two play together for a moment, leading into a cathartic release where the piano and the strings play the same melody together. If the piano was Komi, then Tadano is the string section, and in that moment they are in tune as they speak to one another using the chalkboard. It's outstanding work, and it moves me to tears every time. After this point in the video, I'm going to get pretty heavy into spoilers for the show, so if you haven't seen it yet and you're still not quite sold on the show, I will leave you with this. This is a show that is absolutely worth watching, not just for the visual art that I just
describe, but also the immense heart and charm that it has. The characters are fun and relatable, and it is at times a surprisingly thoughtful reflection on how social anxiety can afflict anybody, and that it's something a lot of us struggle with. It's also at other times highly silly, but overall it's just intensely adorable. I could not recommend it more, and it is my favorite season of anime to come out in 2021. Okay, spoiler stuff time, so if you haven't seen the show yet, drop a like, watch it, and then come back. Or keep watching if you don't care about spoilers. I don't know, I can't control you. Or can I?
The writing of this show is neat to me because for the most part there really isn't much of a central plot across the series. There is a setup in the first episode of Komi wanting precisely 100 friends, but the longer the season goes, the more this idea seems to be pushed to the wayside in favor of just watching Komi live her life, meet people, and grow as a person. This to me is the best thing the show could have done. Instead of making it about the number of friends she has, it becomes about the quality. By the end of the season, she's making friends on her own without Tadano's help, and this time these friends are genuinely interested in her, as opposed to the large majority of the people who've befriended her, who seem to be interested in being friends with the coolest kid in the school / trying to get into her pants. Looking at you, Yamai. The other neat thing about this series is that each episode isn't just one 20-minute story, but a collection of 3 to 4 short stories detailing moments in Komi's life that are, to the ordinary person, exceedingly mundane, but are massive steps for her. Each of these little stories follows a fairly standard pattern, but it's not one that gets tied easily. A setup for something is introduced, Komi goes on a mission of some kind, and then anything from hijinks to heart-crushing adorableness ensues. It doesn't really take long for the formula to be obvious. I think I'd sussed it out by the 3rd episode, but it always manages to stay entertaining due to the heart and humor that is employed through the scenes. Let's take an example from episode 3, the section that Netflix titles It's Just a Phone. By the way, I do like Netflix's prefacing each section title with It's Just an insert thing here. It's an honestly pretty clever way of illustrating that these things that are so frightening to Komi tend to be things that normal people take for granted. It's neat. So in It's Just a Phone, we have our setup. Komi asks her parents to buy her a mobile phone. Then we get her mission. Ask her friends to put their numbers into the phone, but she wants to do it by herself. What follows are some pretty funny shenanigans involving Najumi's complete inability to understand Komi to this.
What the fuck is going on?
Which is then topped off by the incredibly cute detail that Komi wanted Aguri and Najumi to write their numbers down on paper so that Tadano's number would be put into the phone first. From an incredibly simple formula, we've just watched a thoroughly entertaining little vignette that gives us insights into the characters and pushes Komi's relationships with the people around her forward. It's a really efficient format, really, and it is applied time and time again without really getting ever old. From Komi going to a ramen place with her friends, a place run by the soup Nazi from Seinfeld apparently,
No soup for you!
to her getting a haircut by herself. It also helps to rotate the characters that Komi interacts with, keeping the cast open for all sorts of possibilities. What also helps this formula from becoming stale is the sense of humor this show has. It would be incredibly easy for a show like this to be unrelentingly cruel to its socially awkward main character, which is something that grinds my gears something crazy about a lot of American comedy shows. For God's sake, Superstore, leave Sandra alone. She never did anything to you. She doesn't deserve this. Fuck. Sorry, I went through something there. Instead, the show has a more observational sense of humor, which is rarely, if ever, at the expense of Komi. Instead, most of the jokes are on the people around her who don't really understand her, like in the phone story I mentioned earlier. The joke is never on Komi for being awkward, it is instead on Najumi for freaking out at Komi as she approaches holding her phone. Or to pull an example from another story, the joke isn't on Komi for not being able to order a coffee, but instead on the barista who is entirely too excited to make a drink for her. A lot of the comedy comes from the little absurdities in life, and it makes the show a lot more endearing. The characters themselves are also just naturally funny. The comic timing that Najumi has, for example, is a sight to behold, and a lot of their lines are crack-up hilarious, especially when they're just enjoying screwing with people. And that goes for everyone because the dialogue is written with this very tongue-in-cheek humor that's hard not to like. Shit, even Yamai gets a few genuinely funny lines. And as you'll see later, I am not enjoying praising her for anything. But at the bottom of it all, the thing that truly makes the writing crackle is its heart. You can tell that the mangaka of the manga that this is based on, and by extension the people adapting it to anime, really truly love these characters. And it's this affection that helps us to really latch onto these characters, understand them, and grow attached to them ourselves. It is also worth noting that this series has not met an anime cliche that it hasn't jumped on. You want a maid cafe? You got it. You want a beach episode? Well, it's a water park, but whatever, same idea. You want some fan service? You shouldn't. Those are children, but whatever, there is some. You want a school culture festival? Here you go. You want that one episode where the crazy yandere kidnaps someone and faces no fucking consequences for it? Guess what? You're in luck. God, that was such an out of left field episode for this otherwise very low stakes show, wasn't it? I mean, Tadano was nearly murdered. But then again, these tropes don't feel overly tired and done because the show approaches them with the same heart and humor that it does everything else. The water park episode actually serves as a great lesson for Tadano after Komi falls and hurts herself. The culture festival as a season finale is brilliant, as it shows Komi being more social, showing how far she's come since the beginning. And while the fan service in the water park episode prompted an eye roll from me that had me seeing into other dimensions, the show does leave Komi out of the most egregious of it, so yay. I mean, I guess that part is left to the freaks on r/Komi Lude. What is wrong with you people? Are you fucked? At the center of the series is of course the namesake, Shoko Komi, the second protagonist named Shoko I've run into with difficulty communicating. No, I won't compare those characters any further. I think they'd be friends though. By the way, Komi's name is a pun. With the surname placed first as it is in Japanese, her name Komi Shoko sounds a bit like Komiusho, which roughly translates into English as social anxiety. So that's kind of fun. The most important part of Komi's personality is of course her crippling social anxiety, and really surprisingly, it feels completely real. Going into the show, I was fully expecting the typical shit you see with socially anxious characters on TV. You know, the badly acted stuttering, the I'm not like the others crap that they always seem to have going on, that sort of thing that makes it really hard for me to find a socially awkward character who actually feels real. Before this show, it was Reginald Barclay from Star Trek, and that's pretty much it. But I was very pleasantly surprised. Now, yes, the social anxiety that Komi has is very much prettied up for the purposes of the show because we need our protagonist to be heart-crushingly adorable, but it is rooted in very real things that I feel like shit that I've gone through. For example, the first time Komi opens up to Tadano in a scene that I will come back to, she gives us a monologue on the chalkboard about how much it hurts watching other people talk to each other like it's nothing, how badly she wants to join in, and then most heart-wrenching of all, how she thinks she's wasting Tadano's time and that he should just walk away and ignore her. She even apologizes to him for what she sees as a waste of his time. I had not been punched in the gut by a show the way that scene did in a long fucking time, because everything she put on the board felt absolutely entirely real. The feeling of watching people have a conversation and wishing I knew how to join in is, to be honest, the bane of my existence. Komi's attempt at pushing Tadano away is almost verbatim something I've said to some of my friends before. And here's something I can tell you for free. Komi was in intense pain when she wrote that to Tadano. She didn't want to do it, but she felt like it was necessary, like it was just how it is. So seeing that represented on TV in this beautifully animated anime no less, yeah, I cried. And I'll do it again. With all this in place, it would have been very easy for this show to just write Komi's character as she can't talk, that's it, and have Tadano essentially have to always save her from bad situations. You know, the Makoto Shinkai approach. Look, I love your name, but have you seen Weathering with You? It's the same movie, just set in Vancouver. This show can sometimes slide into that territory, but it does make up for it by making sure that Komi has a well-defined character. Some of it is pretty standard protagonist stuff. She's kind, caring, all that jazz that is in general very hard to dislike, but the real meat of her character is what we watch develop. At the beginning, Komi is pretty much resigned to her fate of being lonely, trying to push Tadano away almost the moment she begins to get to know him. But through the series, we watch her slowly build up a sense of confidence. It's not a huge amount of confidence, but it is there. For example, the Komi of episode 1 would have given up on the part-time job bit almost immediately. But by this point in the series, she's grown enough to want to keep trying. She also has a sense of humor. She loves puns and dad jokes. Fuck you, Tadano. They're funny. Her joke to Tadano to try and diffuse the awkwardness around her accidentally calling him was hilarious, and she also has a bit of a cheeky side. The fact that she was able to troll her dad without uttering a single word is just amazing, by the way. Hey, speaking of Komi's family, one of the things that I love about this show is that Komi has such a loving and caring family who understand her and want the best for her. I feel like it would have been all too easy for this show to say Komi's family sucks and that's why she's scared of talking to people, but I feel like that would have robbed the show of a bit of nuance. Instead, her family is very nurturing, allowing us to explore other reasons why Komi might be so anxious around other people. And it seems like part of that reason is her father. Much like his daughter, Masayoshi Komi is a socially anxious person, preferring not to speak much at all. To best understand his relationship with his daughter,
daughter, it's worth looking at one of my favorite parts of the show so far, the bit where he and Komi go for some shaved ice. To begin with, we immediately understand that much like his daughter, Masayoshi's silence can be mistaken for being overly stern, as observed by some people watching them take their seat at the shaved ice place who seem under the impression that he must be cross with her. However, Masayoshi's got an additional hurdle in this respect. He's built like a house. This combined with a quiet nature and an unreadable face not only makes him look aloof, but probably also a little scary to most around him. But there's nothing scary about Masayoshi. Throughout the scene, he's struggling to find the courage to ask his daughter out loud about how school's been treating her. It might seem weird to some that a father might feel such an anxiety, but take it from me, sometimes it's easier for a parent to approach some topics than it is to approach some others. And once he does ask the question, and feels very proud of himself for it, in a genuinely hilarious moment, Komi manages to play a joke on him without uttering a single word, suggesting that school's been going very badly actually, before she lets him know that she's joking. And then he pats her on the head. God, this show's adorable. It's not a long scene, but we understand Komi's relationship with her father very well from it, and we actually learn a bit more about Komi in the process. She's a lot cheekier than she's able to express to people outside of her family. But most of all, we learn that she's got a healthy relationship with her father, one in which she feels comfortable kidding around in. We also learn that they're able to communicate with each other without really speaking, something that mystifies and amuses her mother. Speaking of her mother, do I go in for the Kakyoin joke? Komi's relationship with her mother is a little more archetypical than her father, though that does lend an interesting spin on the family dynamic. The most obvious thing about Shuko Komi is that while she looks a lot like her daughter, they're almost nothing alike. Whereas Komi is a very shy and anxious person, Shuko has no such inhibitions, being a very bubbly and chatty character indeed. One thing we learn across the series is that it's generally considered normal for Shuko to talk for extended periods of time to the others without the others saying anything at all in response. Best of all, this doesn't faze Shuko in the slightest. In fact, I suspect she's pretty happy about it. It also seems to me that the family is happy to sit and listen to her go on about whatever's on her mind, with a possible exception of Shosuke, but we'll get to him in a minute. It's also established that Shuko doesn't quite understand her family's quiet nature, but is infinitely supportive of them nonetheless, and is in fact sometimes worried about them. For example, when Komi tells her that she's going to the library by herself, Shuko is worried about whether that's such a good idea. But like mothers, she has absolutely no issue with embarrassing her daughter if she gets the prime opportunity. By the way, while we're on this topic, you guys are aware that she's not literally eternally 17 and that she was just being a bit cringy, right? Like, I see a lot of memes about it on the Komi fandom, but I'm a dum-dum who's not always good at reading the room. That's a reference. So I can't tell if you're joking or not. You'll notice that I've not said much about Shosuke yet, and that's because as of yet, I can't really get a good read on him. From context of being around the fandom, I've come to understand that he's capable of being chatty like his mother, but makes the active choice not to be, preferring the quiet. This is interesting to me, and I'd like to see that explored a bit more in the future alongside how he and Komi get along, beyond him telling Komi to shut up when she makes a bit of noise for a change. Typical younger brother shit, am I right?
I'm just a regular Joe.
Then, of course, there's the Chadano himself, Hitohito Tadano. Throughout the series, it is made abundantly clear that Tadano is meant to be just your average guy. He excels at precisely nothing at school. He gets decent scores in his tests, he's so-so at sports, etc. Even his name, when his surname is placed first, Tadano Hitohito, translates to just a person. His parents really did him dirty with that one, didn't they? On the surface, he's just a
Regular Joe with a regular job.
That's enough of that. But under the skin of being just a regular person is something far more complex than that. Part of Tadano's life goal at the beginning of the series is to not stand out in any way, to blend in entirely. I tried to write a Yoshikage Kira joke here, but nothing struck me as particularly funny. The reason for this is that under all the average Joe stuff he does, Tadano is a very awkward kid. We learn pretty quickly that in junior high, he put on a bit of a show of himself, seeing himself to be a lot cooler than he really was. This, of course, led to humiliation involving a girl whose name is literally Kawaii, by the way, rejecting him, at which point he decided he didn't want to stick out at all, that to be notable in any way could open himself up to ridicule or scrutiny. In this way, Tadano becomes incredibly relatable. He doesn't want anyone's eyes on him, he just wants to live his life. So it sucks for him that he sat in the one place where everyone's eyes would be on him all the time, right? Not only does Tadano's own social anxieties make for a nice counterpart for his attempt to pass as just a regular guy, it also makes an important point for the series, that even someone who seems completely ordinary and put together can be anxious, can be worried about what other people think of them, even to the point of changing their behavior to avoid that scrutiny. It's entirely possible that a lot of the so-called normal people we struck past on the streets might be struggling with such a thing. The anxiety around social situations means that Tadano is immediately able to understand Komi. Well, not instantly, but he is definitely the first one to realize that she isn't the goddess the school had preemptively decided she was. He knows what it's like to feel anxious around people, and when he does finally recognize that in Komi, he reaches out to her in my favorite anime moment in all of 2021. I
I imagine this isn't a controversial opinion, but this is still probably the best scene in the anime so far. And that might sound a little backhanded given that this is in, the first episode, but from start to finish, it really is a brilliantly written and directed piece of animation that will go down as one of my favorite anythings to come out in the past few years. I think the best thing about the chalkboard scene is how completely natural it feels in terms of two very awkward teenagers trying to figure out how to communicate with each other. It all begins as Tadano wakes up from getting his shit rocked by someone trying to catch Komi's attention, where Komi feels she's embarrassed herself because she got caught talking to a little cat plushie. As Komi makes her escape, Tadano takes a huge risk in just shouting, "Hey, are you bad at talking to people?" at her. I mean, imagine if her response had just been, "None of your business, jog on." And Komi stops in her tracks. For the first time that day, someone has actually looked at her as more than an idol. More to the point, he picked up on something that others either didn't notice or didn't want to. She turns around to ask how Tadano knew, but she gets stuck, stuttering over trying to form a simple question. As she struggles to speak, Tadano once again demonstrates that he's actually paying attention to Komi and suggests that she use the chalkboard to ask the question. However, once Komi has an answer as to how Tadano knew she wasn't good at talking to people, Tadano feels like he's run out of things to say and tries to leave, only to be stopped by Komi. For a moment, Komi allows herself to feel like she can open up to someone, and she does, explaining how hard her social anxiety has made her life so far. For a moment, it seems to be going well, save for a break in the conversation for her to fight down some hiccups, but the anxiety that Komi has been describing takes her over, and she shuts down, pushing Tadano away. I spoke about this when talking about Komi as a character, but it bears mentioning again because the way the scene progresses feels extremely real. Not just for the emotions it is pulling from, but how they progress. You don't automatically feel better just because someone reached out to you. That anxiety might be a reprieve for a moment, but it will sneak up on you again and find another way to make you feel like shit, just as it does to Komi here. For a moment, she's allowed herself to feel as if she can reach out to Tadano, but the anxiety returns, telling her that all she's doing is annoying him, and that he's better off without her. When he makes a lighthearted attempt to brush her apology off, she doesn't seem to hear it, because part of her won't let her hear it. It's only when Tadano begins writing on the board too that she can truly accept that Tadano wants to be her friend. And again, the montage that follows of them getting to know each other set to that beautiful score continues to feel absolutely real, because again, Komi's anxiety isn't magically gone just because she accepts that Tadano wants to be her friend. It's still stressing her out to open up to someone, but it's something that she really wants to do, and so she takes it at her own pace, Tadano following her lead the whole time. The fact that he's giving her the space she needs to work this out is why by the end of the scene she's come to trust him, to consider him her friend, and to accept his slightly cheesy proclamation that he will help her find 99 more friends before awkwardly dashing off to her next class. Again, making herself a friend does not magically make them not awkward towards each other. They still have to work at it. In a way, this scene is the thesis statement of the show, that it is all about reaching out to someone on your own terms and respecting them so they feel comfortable letting you in. It's also about facing your fears and those voices in your head that tell you that you're not good enough. And most of all, it's about friendship. Jesus fucking Christ, why do I make that sound so damn cheesy?
I've decided I will cause problems on purpose.
Whereas Tadano is Komi's first friend, immediately understanding her awkwardness and immediately changing gears to engage with her on her own terms, Najimi is very different. Najimi is the opposite of both Komi and Tadano in that they are an exuberant, extroverted ball of chaos and cheer. They have a mischievous streak a mile long, which leads to some of the more entertaining situations Komi finds herself in. The sheer number of times I wrote "Najimi, you fucker," "Najimi, you bastard," or words to that effect in my note-taking process is innumerable. There's nothing Najimi enjoys more than stirring the pot and messing with people. From annoying Tadano with overly sexual jokes because they know it makes him uncomfortable, to playing Jenga in a library when they're already in trouble for making too much noise just because they're bored. Komi and Najimi could not be more different, and for this reason they struggle to connect to begin with. Najimi's usual approach to their relationships, which is using questioning to get to know someone and talking with them about whatever comes to their mind, simply doesn't work with Komi, because she's not really able to respond in the way Najimi expects. This is best shown in the scene where Komi and Najimi walk home together. The whole time, Najimi is trying their normal approach to friendships, asking if she remembers them, commenting on social life, and so on. We understand as viewers that Komi is trying her hardest to respond to them, but Najimi doesn't see that, only seeing someone who's just ignoring them. And it scares them because they've always been able to befriend anybody with complete ease. In the end, they only become friends because of a misunderstanding where everybody but Tadano thinks that Komi threatened to murder this ultra mega creep / attempted rapist with his own keys. This is, by the way, also pretty rooted in reality. More social people don't always understand that people with social anxiety really are trying, and a lot of the time get written off as just being rude when that's not their intention at all. So following up the first episode where two people are able to connect with a common awkward ground, with an episode where this reality of how socially anxious people can be seen by those who don't quite understand yet, is a great piece of writing. It not only shows a more realistic side to living with anxiety, but works in terms of narrative. It is definitely not going to be smooth sailing for Komi when it comes to making making friends. And none of this is to dunk on Najimi, by the way, because they really are trying and do learn how to understand Komi somewhat as the season goes on. It's just a bit more trial and error for them. For example, their first instinct to help Komi with her social anxiety is to throw her in the deep end, so to speak, sending her to Starbucks, Stan Bakes,
You wanna get sued?
to get them a very specific coffee, for example. This is also a common misconception about social anxiety, that you can just get over it if you have to, and Najimi only realizes that it doesn't work like that when Komi comes back with the wrong order in tears because she thinks Najimi's gonna hate her for getting it wrong. After this, Najimi realizes that their way of approaching things isn't necessarily the best way to go and changes their approach a little. They still maintain their outgoing and occasionally shit-stirring nature, but in a different context now. For a start, they think through all their friends who might be socially anxious and proposes that Komi start making friends there. They're still encouraging her to step out of her comfort level, but it's no longer throwing her in the deep end. The same mentality applies to asking Komi if they can go to her place. They know that this would be a big step for Komi, but specify that Tadano would be there too, which they believe might make it all the more comfortable. In this way, we can see Najimi's growth in understanding Komi. For much of the first half of the series, they maintain that they don't understand Komi at all, always needing Tadano as an interpreter, but the longer the season goes, the more it seems to me that they're selling themselves short, especially in the water park episode. There, it isn't Tadano who realizes that the best thing to do for Komi after she falls is to keep having fun without her, it's Najimi. They have come to understand Komi's anxiety a lot better, and as a result is able to be a much better friend to her. For the most part, anyway. They do try the whole order my shit thing again, which was an asshole move for sure, but... Now, you may have noticed I haven't mentioned something big yet, and that is Najimi is Najimi. Now, let's get this clear. I am stoked by the fact that there is a non-binary character in this anime, and have absolutely no issue with that. My only question is how good a piece of non-binary representation Najimi is. Now, for the most part, from what I can tell, the show isn't interested in making Najimi's gender identity the butt of the joke, like shows of this nature have a habit of doing. Most of the humor surrounding it comes from other people's reactions, and Najimi gleefully trolling people who don't catch on fast enough. However, some things may raise an eyebrow, like their uncertain gender being mentioned in the same breath as them being a compulsive liar, which seems a bit harsh anyway. I don't think you could accuse Najimi of constantly fibbing. Trolling, yes, but not lying. Now, I don't think the anime meant anything by that at all, as it's far more obviously just the anime saying, here's Najimi, the non-binary shit stirrer. But the phrasing doesn't do it any favors and might lend into some stereotypes. I don't know, I think it's just something the show should keep an eye on because they've been doing a good job for the most part so far, and it would be a bummer for them to step in it regarding a group of people who are in need of some good representation. Okay, I'm gonna get off my soapbox now, and none of this is to take away from my enjoyment of Najimi as a character, because as I said, I love them. They're probably my favorite character in this show.
Now is the time to panic!
Himiko Aguri is a character that I have reservations about, but I am interested in the way her particular eccentricities are applied to the series overall. To begin with, much like Komi, Aguri is very socially anxious, but in her case, a lot more focus is placed on her self-image issues. She spends the first part of her introduction comparing herself to Komi, who she sees as supremely beautiful, and comparing herself to Komi to make the point that she's not very good looking at all. She's unhappy with her body shape, with her face, with everything, and believes herself to be unattractive. This continues rather nicely in the vein the show has already established of having characters who represent different kinds of anxiety that a teenager, or anyone really, might have. But it's with Aguri that I think they slip a bit. Now, don't get me wrong, I think her introduction is really touching, but later on she gets saddled with the cliche of the big character likes food. They do make an effort to subvert that cliche a little in that it's less about the sort of when do we eat lol bullshit that a character like that might get stuck with in an American comedy, and more about her being really passionate about something and having a notebook on places she likes and why, making it seem more like a nerdy thing than anything else. And I genuinely don't think the writers meant any harm by it, as she's never made fun of by the show for it, but the shadow of a stereotype does still linger over the character. It's just worth noting is all. On top of her body image issues though, Aguri also just sucks at talking to people, and it's this that draws Komi to her of all of Najimi's friends suggested to her after Najimi's breakdown of who they think might get along with Komi the best. This leads to the main action of their first interactions, which boils down to a pretty simple premise. Komi's decided to try and talk to Aguri on her own, but is in a perpetual state of working up the courage to talk to her. To Aguri, who can't see what's going on in Komi's mind, this just looks like her stalking her for no reason, driving Aguri's anxiety into a frenzy. Through all of this, Aguri has been tasked with telling her class that gym class will be on the school field because the teacher is a lazy asshole who can't do it herself, a character trait for the teacher that remains oddly consistent across the show, by the way. I like the window that this gives into Aguri's mind, because as she's walking to the class to deliver her message, we see an internal monologue as represented by an angelic version of her telling her that she's she's strong, she's powerful, she can do this. It's a bit of an aside, but an important one, I feel. A lot of this show is about delving into how the minds of people who can't really socialize work, so seeing this does convey a nice message. We're all really trying, and it takes a lot of psyching up for us to do something as simple as deliver a message. However, in a painfully relatable moment, Aguri trips on her words in front of everyone and is mid-panic before Komi appears again, prompting Aguri to get so scared she delivers the message without thinking about it before running away. The moment of catharsis when she realizes she delivered the message is a really nice one too. By the way, I feel it's important for you to know that at the point that Komi's approaching Aguri outside the class, I simply wrote Komi Crimson in my notes. I don't know what this means anymore, though after racking my brain trying to figure out what witty joke I had about the band King Crimson, I realized it was probably a JoJo's reference. It was probably both. However, it's after Tadano clears up the misunderstanding and helps Komi explain that she just wanted to be friends with Aguri that we get the weirdest bit of Aguri's character. You see, she's into some very interesting shit and wants Komi to treat her as a dog.
What the fuck?
Yeah, I'm gonna keep it real with you guys. I don't know what to make of this. The best that I can figure, in some ways it does work as a little lesson for Komi, and by extension everyone else, that first impressions are not everything. On the surface, Aguri might be the socially awkward, self-conscious person who's a bit of a mess, but deep down, she's a borderline masochist. I mean, she says later in the show that she wants Komi to hit her, so like, take that how you will. I don't know, I feel like this is a really strange thing to add into a slice of life anime such as this, but if we want to talk really weird additions to a slice of life, boy do I have a character and episode for you. God, I really tried to have something smart and interesting to say about Yamai and what she adds to Komi's journey in making friends, but I can't. She just sucks and is the worst part of an otherwise damn good series. Most of what's interesting about the Yamai episode isn't the kidnapping plot, which I'll jump back to in a minute, but more about Komi's reaction to it. To begin with, it's the first time we see Komi get angry with someone. She's been annoyed before, sulking at Tadano and Najimi for the Stanbakes incident, but here she's actually pretty mad at Yamai. But most interesting of all is her restraint. Her initial response to Yamai's monologue about how much Tadano sucks and why she kidnapped him was going to kill him is to simply release Tadano and tell Yamai that they're leaving and thank you for having her over. Overly polite, right? Except I don't think it was just about that. The read that I got is that Komi is absolutely seething, but doesn't want to lose control over her temper, so she excuses herself from the situation. This is something I actually really like about the direction of the show, because even if it's just a shot of her notebook saying thank you for having us, it still betrays a certain amount of tension. It's only when Yamai pushes it that Komi finally actually responds to her, only saying one thing before storming out. I choose my own friends. For the first time on the show, Komi is actually living up to the severe exterior that everyone else sees. She's also scared out of her mind, as we later learn, but she's mostly really angry at this person who hurt her friend and dared to presume that she could choose her friends for her. However, we also learn later that Komi's absurdly forgiving because she forgives the psycho who nearly killed her best friend. I mean, I guess maybe she thought that since Tadano accepted Yamai's shitty apology that everything was fine and she's just not the type to hold a grudge. I don't know. This whole episode's whack. The other key thing this episode does for Komi is character consistency. We saw in the first episode that she's liable to try and push people away for one reason or another, and this happens again here, but just for different reasons. She feels like it would be better for Tadano if they weren't friends. Because Yamai said that everything she'd done was for Komi, she blames herself for what happened to Tadano and tries to push him away for his own good. And again, like the last time, it is obvious that this is something that Komi doesn't want to do, but she's haunted by the image of Tadano tied up in Yamai's closet and can't stop thinking about what might have happened if they hadn't been there and how she thinks it's her fault. Now, obviously it's not Komi's fault, but the thing about anxiety like this is it doesn't matter whether it was your fault or not. There might even be a part of Komi that knows that she didn't do anything wrong and she's not to blame at all, but her anxiety twists the story in her mind so that it is her fault and that it's for the best if she's alone again. And despite how silly it was for Tadano to respond to that with Komi's I choose my own friends, it sends a clear message. Fuck Yamai. You didn't do anything wrong. And I think that was super important that Komi said that she still wanted to be Tadano's friend out loud. She's clearly struggling with it, but I think in a way it was her trying to fight back the voice in her head telling her to pull away from Tadano. That if she says it out loud, it can be that much more real, and she will have fought it back with her voice. This video is really bringing out the cheesy side of my media analysis, isn't it? So yeah, that was a lot about not Yamai. I should actually say something about her, shouldn't I? I guess if I were to say that if Yamai represents anything in the path Komi is taking in learning about people, it's about toxicity. Some people are just toxic, and you will find yourself dealing with that. The more I think about Komi's forgiveness of Yamai, the more it begins questions to track for me actually. It's possible that she didn't really forgive her, but doesn't know how to confront the situation now that the moment is past. Speaking from experience, I have let all manner of shit slide from some very toxic people because I simply haven't been able to figure out how to approach dealing with it after the fact. So the really messed up thing about Yamai is that she's an exaggerated version of someone that could exist, a deeply toxic friend who's only there for their own ulterior motives. In this case, Yamai trying to get into Komi's pants. My god, is Yamai loathsome. She tries to lewd Komi on more than one occasion and even upskirts her at some point.
Unforgivable.
Naka Naka is a character who resonated with me pretty deeply and remains one of my favorite characters on the show to this point. To begin with, Naka Naka is a chunibyo, or is at least defined so by the show. The general concept of a chunibyo, for those who aren't in the know, is someone who lives in a fantasy world, rarely interacting with people outside of the context of that fantasy. In this respect, Naka Naka does fit the definition. The first time we see her, she's taken on some kind of alter ego and is referring to Komi as Princess Komilia, telling her that they must form a blood pact for the safety of the planet.
What the fuck?
Throughout her appearances on the show, she says an internal monologue that something called the Dragon Force flows through her, granting her awesome power. It's all make-believe, of course, and she's looked down a bit by her classmates for it, Najimi in particular calling her behavior cringy. Here's the kicker. I relate to this. Now, I'm not going to say that I behave like this at the ripe old age of 22. No, that would be silly. But when I was in the 7th grade, I got a sonic screwdriver from Doctor Who for Christmas. So did my best friend, so we, and I really wish I was making this up, ran around the school field at recess, Dalek hunting. Then one of my friends put some distance between us in the days following that. I wonder if there's a connection. But my favorite thing that this show does with the chunibyo trope is somewhat turn it on its head. The definition given by Wikipedia for the chunibyo is that they tend to have an inflated opinion of themselves, using the fantasy they live in as a way to stand out or as something of a power trip. Naka Naka, however, is very different. Her fantasy isn't an attempt to look cool or anything, it seems to be much more a coping mechanism than anything else. Through her story in episode 5, we come to understand that she's a very, very lonely person, and all she wants in the world is a friend. This revelation recontextualized her use of fantasy earlier really well. She wasn't being weird at Komi for the sake of being different, she was legitimately trying to reach out. Naka Naka doesn't know how to socialize, much like a lot of the characters we've seen so far, and the only way she can think of to reach out is through this fantasy. This is why it begins to bother her when Komi starts to ask too many questions about the fantasy. It was never about the deep lore, it was about the blood pact, the friendship. This all comes to a head in gym class when Naka Naka finds herself completely alone as the class pairs up. She tries to use her fantasy to reinforce her hurt feelings, but it doesn't work, and instead she sits with her head on her knees trying not to cry. It's a gut puncher of a scene, and it definitely hurt to watch. So when Komi appears holding out her hand for Naka Naka to join her, you bet your ass I got a little misty-eyed. This is also a bit of a milestone for Komi, as for the first time she's made a friend without anybody else's help. While she wasn't sure about everything when Naka Naka first approached her, it's clear from her responses to her fantasy that she is interested and wants to know more. Not just about the Dragon Force, but the person telling her about it. Although Tadano and Najimi seem under the impression that Komi believes in the Dragon Force stuff, which seems to suggest at least one of them has a pretty dim opinion of her intelligence. Moreover, nobody prompted her to go over to Naka Naka at the gym, unlike with previous friends where Tadano was standing behind her helping her out. It's a massive step for both of them, making it a really touching moment. Now, while this doesn't mark an important milestone in Komi's social development, I also want to mention the time she goes to Naka Naka's house for a visit, mostly just because it's really cute and relatable on both of their parts. For example, I really love that Komi shows a genuine interest in Naka Naka's anime merch and video games. She doesn't understand most of it on account of not really being a gamer, but it's clear that she's listening, and in subs it's clearly stated that she finds Naka Naka's explanation of her video game neat, if not a little puzzling. It's really sweet to me that she shows interest in something that a friend loves. I also really love the way Naka Naka's excitement about her video game is written. Once again, it's pretty relatable in that I too get so excited talking about something I love that everything else just goes away for a moment. And again, they don't make her the butt of the joke for being a nerd. It's something we're supposed to find endearing, and I really do. And that's a lot more than I can say for most nerds or geeks in media, so I'll take it.
And they were roommates.
Onimine and Otori are really fun to me in that while they represent different milestones for Komi, I always think of them as a package deal because of the relationship that grows between them between the last 2 episodes of the season, which, much like the rest of this show, is just violently cute. Of the two, Komi meets Onimine earlier, and for most of her story in episode 10, she is a vehicle through which we develop Komi's character a bit further as Komi grows a bit of a jealous streak. See, Onimine is much like Najimi in the fact she gets along with damn near anybody, but for Onimine, she's seen as almost the class's big sister. This general friendliness she has leads her to try and help Tadano when the teacher dumps a bunch of her work on him, but Komi misreads this and Tadano's absent-minded dismissal of her as something growing between Tadano and Onomine. This causes Komi to become jealous, which is an interesting development for her, I reckon. Komi hasn't had much by way of negative emotions towards other people save for her anger at Yamai, but here we can see something in her eyes that approaches who does this hussy think she is when she sees Onomine talking to Tadano all the time. This development makes Komi an even more round character, and I think it promises for some interesting tension in the future. Not because of Onomine, because as we see that gets resolved pretty quickly, but Komi being shown to have a bit of a jealous streak could lead to some situations where it comes back, or her realizing it's something she needs to work on. After all, we all have things about ourselves we need to work on. We just need to be aware of it, and I think it would be neat to see Komi explore this jealousy and whether it's good for her or not. In this case, however, as I said, it gets resolved pretty quickly. Onomine realizes what's going on and beats a hasty retreat, later explaining to Komi that she didn't mean to come between them. I like that Onomine handles this possibly awkward situation with good humor. She's initially put off by Komi, so once she realizes what was happening, she seems to find the whole situation a little funny, even teasing Komi a little about it, in a good-natured way of course. And this is something I like about Onomine in general. She gets to the point, but she's never really cruel about it either. A little blunt on occasion maybe, but never outright rude. And I think this honesty is also something that's going to be really nice to see going forward, especially since it always comes in the interest of helping people. And then there's Otori, the wonderful cloud of happiness who doesn't have a single thought going on in her head. And it's this very airy nature about her that leads her to the reason why she wants to be Komi's friend. She has no idea what's going on with the school worshipping Komi or anything. She just saw Komi, Tadano, and Najimi hanging out a bunch, thought it looked nice, and wanted to be friends with them. That's simple. And it's just so freaking sweet, really. And it's definitely something that Komi needed with her friends, because up until now, with the exception of Tadano and Nakanaka probably, all of her friends have approached her because Tadano put them together, or they wanted to be a dog, or because they were trying to smash. But Otori has no such intentions. She just wants friends, and I love her for that. But of course, the relationship between the three is cemented when they go to the Home Depot or whatever to buy supplies for the upcoming Culture Festival. The first important thing that Otori does is her invitation to Komi to go shopping for supplies. The hook for this episode shows Komi putting her vote in to do the Maid Cafe for the Culture Festival and expressing her interest in taking part in the proceedings. It's an understated moment when she casts her vote, but it's a hugely important one. Komi's been on the sidelines of social interaction for most of her life, so taking part in a class activity is a massive step for her. This isn't something that someone else pushed her towards either. This is something that she chose to be a part of and is excited to help with. So when the rest of the class sidelines her to worship her as a god, not only is it evidence entry 784 that this class needs to go to therapy, but it is also actively hindering Komi's progress in becoming more social. For a change, it isn't Komi's awkwardness holding her back, it's other people. This is why Otori's invitation to go shopping is so important, because she's essentially thrown a rope to Komi for her to pull herself out of that pit of snakes to participate like she wants to. I also love how Otori seems completely oblivious to the fact that her class is being weird to Komi. Like, she just basically says, hey, you're not busy at the moment. Wanna help? It's good stuff. The trip to the store also has some really good moments. Otori absent-mindedly wandering off provides relatable comment both in her spaced out wandering and Komi's oh god, oh fuck, we lost her reaction. And Komi's speech to Otori is also really sweet. But I think the most important part of the day is when Komi manages to say a word to Onomine and Otori. It's not much, but she doesn't stutter at all when she speaks to them. For the first time, Komi is completely comfortable around someone. Around most of her other friends, there's an element of anxiety in talking to them, whether it's down to Najimi being a lot, or the fact that Komi is very clearly in love with Tadano, whether she's realized that yet or not, or the rest of the class placing her on this bizarre pedestal. But Onomine and Otori don't do that. They're just there to be Komi's friends and vibe with her, and more than anything, that's what Komi needs, and this is why she's comfortable enough to speak to them. Also, did I mention Onomine and Otori's relationship earlier? Cause it's adorable. To begin with, it looks like it's just Onomine's general watching out for everyone mentality, but once Otori says, you're my friend too to her, it's clear that it'll evolve into something more. Like, watch these two dance together and tell me that they're not in love. Come on. Also in the dub, Onomine calls Otori by her given name Kaede, and I don't know, I think that's cute. One final thing I love about Onomine and Otori's friendship with Komi is that both narratively and thematically, they help lead into our season finale, the Culture Festival. Ultimately, if I were to sum up the anime succinctly for someone, it wouldn't be in the first episode, brilliant though it is. It would be in the final episode and a half as we watch Komi navigate the Itan Culture Festival, as it contains everything that has become a staple over the series so far. For a start, it follows the formula that I described a little early in the video, albeit in a slightly different manner. We have our setup. There is a Culture Festival, and Komi's class is doing a maid cafe. We have Komi's mission, participate in said maid cafe, and enjoy the festival. And then we have the hijinks, which are also a nice summary of the show thus far.
Najume's being a shit-stirring chaos bastard, Yamai is being Yamai, and Tadano is allowing himself to be put in what he sees an embarrassing situation because of Komi. Using the same formula the show has relied on in the finale might seem like a misstep when I'm describing it this way, but in actual fact it helps to underline how much Komi has grown across the season. Instead of struggling to simply ask one person to share a lunch with her, Komi is walking around this culture festival with a group of friends and actively participating in one of their activities. Not only that, but as stated earlier, this is something she actively wanted to do, so she's contributing ideas to the class as well. But of course, she's still not magically cured of her social anxiety just because she's putting herself out there. It's still a struggle for her to speak to people. When this weirdo comes into the maid cafe, she's unable to speak to him at all.
What's up with this guy anyway? Dude's twice the age of the students here. The fuck is he trolling around a high school maid cafe for? I don't care that he's the maid expert or whatever. In fact, that makes it weirder.
However, she's a lot more willing to try and talk to people. Not just people in general either, but mass groups of them. When Najumi pushes her up on the roof for the rooftop confessions, is this a real thing? Because that sounds like a bullying speedrun to me. She doesn't back away from it like she might have earlier in the season. Instead, she makes an effort to speak, only really getting out of nyan. Oh god, I hated how I said that. Leading to the school deciding that she's a cat maid. Again, the recurrence of cat imagery that follows Komi around. From a chalkboard in a quiet classroom to a school full of people standing below her, waiting to hear what she has to say. Komi has come quite a long way, indeed. Then after the day's festivities, the episode comes to a nice quiet end. Komi, Tadano, and Najumi dance together, Najumi having saved Komi and Tadano from their own awkwardness. They all go to a karaoke bar with some friends for one last bit of lighthearted fun, where in an amusing bend of the fourth wall, Komi tries to sing the end credits song, and the core trio ends the season with beginning to launch into Cider Girl's opening theme. But it's after the end credits that the season really comes to an end, as we take one last look into Komi's life before the season break. Here, just before going to sleep, Komi writes down the names of all her friends, providing one last visual reminder to the audience as to how far she's come. Then, as Komi holds the book to herself, smiling at how many friends she's made, and as the soundtrack plays some final piano notes, a note appears on the screen. This is dedicated to all those whose chests tighten up when they interact with other people. At the end of the day, this is what this show is about, providing a place of solace for those who struggle to talk to people through characters they can empathize with. Not just the socially awkward Komi, but the self-conscious Aguri, the lonely Naka, and Tadano, who just wants what's best for his friends. And that is why I love Komi Can't Communicate. Holy fucking shit, this is a long video. And this is with me cutting out a lot of things I wanted to discuss in fuller detail, by the way. For example, I love that the show gives Komi a network of adult characters who are looking out for her. There's the hairdresser Komi goes to, who not only knows her face, but knows how to hold an amicable conversation with her. And then there's the ramen guy, who is able to understand Komi because he too prefers to keep quiet. Not only is it really nice to see that Komi isn't alone, but it also sends a really nice message that anybody can have social anxiety, be they a teenager or a full-grown muscular man with a ramen shop. I was also going to do one of my episode by episode breakdowns, but fairly obviously most of that got cut for time. Maybe I'll upload some of what I wrote here separately? I don't know. But the fact that I had so much that I wanted to say about the show that it was a struggle to keep it around an hour is a testament to what a surprise to me it was as to how quickly I fell in love with this show. Have there been animes on TV this season with better animation or story or what have you? Yes, I think so. On a technical level, the last few episodes of the second season of Demon Slayer outclassed this show by a considerable distance, but ultimately the decider for me was in the emotional reaction this show got from me. Seeing so much of myself in an anime I watched on a whim was blindsiding to say the least, and there was something in every episode that I dearly wanted to pull apart and analyze for what it means for Komi's character development. But ultimately my points in the video are what I believe to be the most important for this show and what makes it so great in my mind. It's one of 2 anime that I've ever bought the manga of, and I cannot wait to get invested in the second season of this show. And it's only coming out in April. I'm so fucking excited, guys. Anyway, if you've made it to the end of this behemoth, thank you so much for watching. It means a lot to me when you watch these videos, especially these stupid long ones that take forever to write and put together. Maybe you could be my friend? God, that was such a fucking stupid subscriber plug. Anyway, guys, see you next time, and I hope you all have a good day.